In a city where power meant everything and fear kept doors shut, one name echoed louder than any other: Alexander Voss. A billionaire whose empire stretched across continents, whose very presence could silence a room. Ruthless in business, emotionless in public, Alexander was the kind of man no one dared to cross. But there was one thing no one ever knew. He had once fallen in love, and it was the only time he had ever lost control. Her name was Emily. She wasn't rich nor famous. She worked in a humble flower shop tucked between steel towers and luxury boutiques. Emily had a laugh that made strangers smile and a kindness that felt out of place in a world so sharp. The first time Alexander saw her, he was stepping out of a black SUV, distracted by calls and deadlines, until he caught a glimpse of her arranging sunflowers in the display window. He returned the next day, and the day after, not to buy flowers, but to talk, to listen, to sit in that small shop with the woman who never asked him about money, who didn't care about his last name. For the first time, Alexander wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man. Their connection deepened. Whispers turned into long conversations. Silence felt comfortable, and then, one evening, he made her a proposal. Not for marriage, but for a life with him. One that meant leaving everything she knew behind. Emily looked into his eyes and said no. The next morning, she vanished. Alexander searched everywhere, quietly, ruthlessly, obsessively. He didn't tell anyone, not his assistants, not his advisors, no press, no police, just private investigators and his own eyes scouring security footage, train stations, bus terminals. But she was gone. No forwarding address, no last message. Her flower shop had been closed as if she had never existed. Years passed, but the wound didn't. The man known for being untouchable, who controlled boardrooms with a glance, became more distant, more silent. He buried himself in acquisitions and mergers. He grew colder. People said he had changed, grown darker, more unpredictable. No one knew why, and no one dared ask. But fate has a way of circling back. In a quiet countryside town far from the skyscrapers, a wedding was taking place. The bride wore soft white lace, her bouquet filled with sunflowers. Her name, Emily. After vanishing from the city, she had started over. She opened a new flower shop under a different name. She met Daniel, a kind, grounded man who didn't ask too many questions. He loved her without needing to understand her past, and she loved the peace he brought her. On her wedding day, Emily believed she had finally escaped the ghost of her former life. She stood at the altar, smiling at Daniel, her heart steady, until a hush fell over the room. A tall figure in a charcoal suit stood at the back of the church. Alexander Voss had found her. Emily froze. The world around her blurred, voices muffled like sound underwater. All she could see was the man she had once known so intimately, now a ghost from her past, standing still, unmoving, watching. Alexander's presence wasn't loud. He didn't shout. He didn't demand. He simply stood there, and everyone noticed. Daniel turned, confused by the silence. He looked at the stranger at the back and then back to his bride, whose face had gone pale. "Emily," he whispered. But she didn't respond. Alexander didn't move forward. He didn't interrupt the ceremony. He simply waited, as if giving her a choice, a chance, a moment to remember everything she had run from, and she did. She remembered the dinners they shared in silence, where eye contact said more than words. She remembered his hands, always steady, except when he touched her. She remembered the way he whispered her name like it was a confession, and she remembered the one moment when it all collapsed, when he asked her to leave her world behind and she couldn't, because love to her meant freedom, and with him, she wasn't sure she could breathe. Emily's fingers tightened around the bouquet. Her heart raced. The wedding guests watched in confused silence, uncertain if they were witnessing a romantic twist or the start of something tragic. And then slowly, Alexander turned and walked out of the church. Not a word, not a glance back, but the damage was done. The ceremony resumed, but it had lost its magic. The guests tried to smile, to celebrate, to pretend. Daniel tried to hold her hand again, tried to look into her eyes like before, but something was gone. Emily moved like a ghost through her own reception, smiling politely, laughing at the right moments, thanking everyone. But her mind was elsewhere. That night in their honeymoon suite, Daniel asked gently, "Who was he?" She didn't lie. She told him everything. About the flower shop, the conversations, the offer. About the fear. About how she had run, not just from Alexander, but from who she had become when she was with him. Daniel listened in silence. When she finished, he nodded slowly and said, "But you married me. You chose me." Emily wanted that to be enough. She wanted to erase the shadow of that man from her life. But the truth was undeniable. Alexander Voss had returned, and nothing would be the same. 2 days later, a black envelope arrived at her new flower shop. No name, no sender. Inside, a note written in handwriting she recognized immediately. "You were never invisible to me, and you never will be." She crumpled the paper with shaking hands. Outside, across the street, a black car sat idle, watching. The car was always there, different places, different days, but always just far enough to be unsettling, never moving, never honking, just waiting. Emily told no one, not even Daniel. She tried to convince herself it was paranoia. Maybe she was imagining it, but she wasn't. One morning, she stepped outside and found a sunflower on her doorstep. Not wrapped, not bought, just placed carefully, deliberately. It wasn't from the shop. It wasn't one she had grown. It was a message. The next day, she confronted the driver. The window rolled down. A man in a suit, polite, quiet, handed her a sealed envelope. "Mr. Voss wishes to speak to you, one time, on your terms. He will not appear again if you say no. Just write your answer and I'll leave." Inside the envelope, just one line. "Foreclosure," or whatever you need it to be. Emily sat with the letter for hours. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, she walked to the window and stared into the darkness. What would meeting him again mean? Would it unravel everything she had built, or would it finally set her free? She wrote one word. Yes. They met at a quiet coastal inn, far from the city. Alexander had reserved the entire building. Of course he had. When Emily arrived, she half expected to find a conference room, stiff chairs, security guards. But instead, he was alone. Sitting at a wooden table. No guards, no distractions. He stood when she entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked different, older but not weaker. His suit was as perfect as ever, but there was something in his eyes, something softer, more human. Not the feared billionaire, just a man. "I didn't come to take anything from you," he said quietly. "I just needed to see you." Emily sat, keeping her distance. "Why now?" "Because for years, I searched, not because I was angry, but because I didn't understand. I needed to know, was I the reason you disappeared, or was it something else?" She exhaled slowly. "You were the reason." Silence fell between them like a curtain. "But not in the way you think," she added. "You never hurt me," she continued, eyes fixed on the table. "You never shouted, never forced anything. But being with you was like drowning, quietly, in velvet. You gave me everything, but I couldn't find myself in it." Alexander absorbed her words without flinching. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply nodded slowly. "I'm not built for your world," she said, "and I was afraid that loving you would erase me." He finally spoke. "You were the only real thing I ever had." They talked for hours, not about money or power or the years lost, but about memories. The flower shop, the songs, the laughter. They remembered the version of themselves that had existed in that small corner of the world before everything became complicated. "I'm getting married," she finally said. "I know," he replied. "I was there." She looked up, searching his face. "Why did you come?" because I needed to know if I could still let go. He reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table. "I was going to give you this," he said, 8 years ago. Emily hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with a single sunflower charm. "It was never meant to trap you," he said. "It was just meant to remind you of us." She didn't speak. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the box. "I don't want to be a shadow over your life," he continued. "I wanted to be the light. But if I failed, then this is goodbye." For the first time in years, she saw vulnerability in his face. Not weakness, but surrender. He stood, placed the bracelet in her hand, and walked away. Emily sat alone at the table long after Alexander had gone. The bracelet still rested in her palm, warm from her touch. It wasn't just a gift. It was a memory made tangible, a symbol of something that had almost been and now never would be. She didn't cry. She didn't break. But a quiet ache settled into her chest, the kind that lingers even when the storm has passed. When she returned home, she didn't tell Daniel about the meeting. Not because she was hiding anything, but because some goodbyes are too heavy to explain. She tucked the bracelet away in a drawer she rarely opened. Life resumed. The shop reopened. Customers came and went. But something inside her had shifted. Not regret. Not longing. Closure. Months passed. Emily and Daniel built their life together with patience and care. They traveled, planted a garden behind their house, laughed often. There were no more black cars, no more letters, no more shadows. But one morning, a newspaper headline caught her eye while she waited in line at the bakery. Alexander Voss steps down from his empire, disappears from public life. No scandal, no drama. Just gone. The world speculated. Some said he had moved to a private island. Others believed he was starting over under a new identity. Emily just stared at the photo, his last public image, and felt a strange peace settle over her. It was his final message. He had let go. Years later, Emily became known in the town for her flowers and her warmth. Children visited her shop to learn how to plant seeds. Couples came for wedding bouquets. She became something of a quiet legend, the woman with eyes that had seen both the storm and the calm. One day, a little girl asked her, "Miss Emily, have you ever been in love?" She smiled gently and said, "Yes, twice. One made me strong, the other made me free." The girl didn't understand, but she smiled anyway, and Emily handed her a sunflower. Somewhere in a drawer at home, untouched for years, the bracelet still lay wrapped in a handkerchief. A piece of the past that no longer hurt to remember. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Emily walked to her garden and sat alone with a cup of tea. The wind was gentle, the flowers swayed. She closed her eyes and listened to the quiet. No more running, no more fear. Only gratitude for the paths she had taken, the ones she had turned away from, and the ones she had chosen to walk on her own. Far away on a distant coastline, a man stood on a cliff watching the sea. His name was no longer spoken in boardrooms. He didn't own cities or command fear. But he remembered a flower shop and a girl who once smiled at him like he wasn't a monster. He smiled back at the memory and turned away, finally free. Time continued its quiet march forward. Emily and Daniel grew older, their love weathering seasons like the flowers in her shop. They faced joy, illness, recovery, and change, the natural cycles of a shared life. Emily never forgot Alexander, but his memory softened with the years. It became like an old photograph, faded around the edges but meaningful still. Sometimes, on long walks alone, she would pass a patch of wild sunflowers and pause, not in sadness, not in longing, but in quiet acknowledgement. Not all love stories are meant to last forever. Some arrive to wake something within us, to open doors we never knew existed, and then quietly step away. And in that sense, Alexander Voss had never really left. A part of her would always carry the lesson he gave without knowing, that love is not about possession, but about choice, and that letting go, sometimes, is the purest act of love there is. One autumn morning, Emily received a small, unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside was a photograph, a seaside cabin, wild cliffs behind it, and a single sunflower blooming at the edge of the frame. No signature, no message, just the image. She smiled, tears brimming but not falling. She knew. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a question. It was simply a final note from someone who had once mattered, and who still did, in a place beyond regret or pain. She placed the photograph in her favorite book of poetry, pressed between pages worn from years of reading. A gentle reminder that not all goodbyes are endings. Some are just echoes of a love that helped shape who we become. Years later, when Emily's granddaughter found the bracelet while rummaging through an old drawer, she ran to her and asked, "Whose is this?" Emily took it gently, turning it over in her hand like a relic from another lifetime. "It belonged to a man I once knew," she said softly. "Someone who taught me something very important." "Like what?" "That even the strongest people can feel deeply, and sometimes strength is knowing when to walk away." As the sun dipped once again over the hills, Emily sat in her garden, surrounded by flowers and silence. Life hadn't given her every answer, but it had given her peace, and sometimes that was enough. Tori touched your heart. Say it in comments and share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to walk away from something you loved, just to protect your peace? Let us know. Your story matters.